Hello and welcome to School Safety Today, a podcast brought to you by Raptor Technologies. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. And today we're talking about turning pain into purpose, a father's journey to make schools safer after the Parkland school shooting. And I want to introduce you to my guest today. Max Schachter is a leading school safety advocate who has turned his deepest pain into purpose after losing his son, Alex, in the 2018 Parkland school shooting. Max made it his life mission to make schools safer. He is the founder and executive director of Safe Schools for Alex, focused on providing the most current school safety best practices and resources to students, parents, school districts, and law enforcement so that all children can learn in a safe environment. Since that heartbreaking day that changed Max's life forever, he has been advocating for policy change at the highest levels of the United States government. He has worked alongside members of Congress, leaders of all major federal agencies, and presidents of the United States to make schools safer. Max has testified as a subject matter expert before the United States House and Senate and multiple state legislatures. He has also advised the Federal Bureau of Investigation Behavioral Threat Assessment Center, the U.S. Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center, and the Ohio Attorney General's Office on Threat Assessment Policies and Procedures. It is my pleasure to bring on founder and executive director of Safe Schools for Alex, Max Schachter. Max, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me, Michelle.
It really is good to talk with you, and I'm excited about this conversation because such tragedy, but you're really turning it into, as we talked about, the title of this podcast, Pain with a Purpose. So let me ask you this. After the horrific shooting in Parkland, where your son Alex was one of the 17 victims murdered, you helped pass the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act and were appointed to serve on the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission. So tell me, what are the key lessons learned and policy changes that have come out of the commission?
Well, after the commission was formed, we set out on an investigation of the Parkland tragedy. Our job was to investigate all the interactions between the murderer and the school board, all the interactions between the murderer and law enforcement. We were in charge of investigating the failed law enforcement response during the Parkland school shooting, and then coming up with recommendations to make schools safer. And what we've done in Florida, we've changed school safety at every level with an emphasis on prioritizing safety and security, with the understanding that if the students and the staff do not make it home every day to their families, nothing else matters. And so what we did from the beginning in Florida, we created an Office of School Safety. We didn't have one prior. It's very, very well staffed now. And we spend a tremendous amount of money on school safety. We spend over $200 million a year just on school safety, not including mental health at all. So we've spent over $1 billion, since the shooting, which was in 2018. We have a school safety specialist position, which we created in statute, so that there's now someone who is designated to be in charge of school safety in every district. We have an anonymous threat reporting system statewide. We have a panic app in every school. Every teacher is supposed to have a panic app on their person at all times in case of an emergency, because as we know, seconds save lives. We have a threat assessment team in every school district. Every school has a threat assessment team made up of multidisciplinary stakeholders that are well trained. But we've done a lot. We have a mental health coordinator in every school district. We've done a lot of hardening, and we've done a lot on the prevention side, and then also on the response side. There's not one panacea. There's not one solution to school safety. It's really a holistic approach, having layers of security, layers of protection, and we're never done. with school safety. We're constantly evolving, constantly getting better, and constantly, testing our systems to make sure that what we're doing is being done with fidelity, and it's not just a check the box. And we take it very, very seriously in Florida. So, I mean, those are just a couple. We've been working on this for 5 years, and we're constantly improving and trying to make our schools as safe as they can be.
Let's talk about the improvement, because it takes a village, really. And through Safe Schools for Alex, you've launched a school safety dashboard in 5 states, which has received numerous endorsements from prominent local, state, and national education leaders. So how can schools, legislators, law enforcement, as well as parents use this data to reduce violence in their school communities?
Yeah, thank you for asking about the school safety dashboard. This idea came about as I was sitting on the commission, and it was very hard to be on the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Commission, because during every meeting I'm basically reliving Alex's murder, learning about all the failures that happened before the shooting, all the red flags that existed on the Parkland murderer. He had all of the signs of a future school mass murderer. He was suicidal. He was homicidal. He killed and mutilated animals. He drowned his cat. And then when he became 18, his mother bought him a gun. But from a very, very young age, from age 3, we saw signs of his violence, his violent temper. And then as he got older, he became more aggressive and more obsessed with guns and weapons and mass shootings. And then there were never any consequences for him to get him off his pathway to violence. Even all of his violence in school, the teachers were afraid of him, and even all of the interactions with law enforcement outside of the school. There were over 40 different times that the Broward Sheriff's Office was at his house. And so on the commission, I learned that every school in Florida was required to report incidents of violence and drugs to the State Department of Education. And I have 3 other kids, and I wanted to make sure that nothing happened to them. So when I went to go look at this data, I was confronted with a massive Excel spreadsheet with millions of cells of data. And I said, what am I going to do with this? It was basically useless to me. So that's where the idea to create a school safety dashboard came from. So we basically took that data and injected it into this user-friendly dashboard, so that now parents and schools can go online and type in the name of their school and see exactly what's happening in their child's classroom. You can look at the number of incidents of bullying, assault, fighting, sexual assault, the number of weapons that are coming into your school. There's 26 different incident categories, the amount of drug incidents that are happening, vaping. And it really takes off the blindfold that parents have as they send their kids to school, and gives them, it tells them exactly what's happening inside your school, and gives them information that they need to be involved in your child's education, be involved in your child's school, and the safety and the levels of school safety incidents that are happening. Because if it wasn't for this dashboard, you would send your kid to school and have no idea what's happening inside the classroom. Because I never got a call from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas principal saying, great news, parents, we had a 20% drop in our bullying incidents last year. I never got that call because that call doesn't exist. But now parents can go online, they can look at your school, they can look at, type in your zip code and see, they can compare multiple middle schools in your area. They can, school districts can use the dashboard, because a lot of school districts don't have this kind of data readily available. They know what's happening in their school, But how do they know if their numbers are good or bad or high or low? You really don't until you're able to get a bird's eye view of your whole district or of the whole state to really understand what's happening. And the goal of the dashboard, we hope that all of these stakeholders, including legislators in Tallahassee and the Department of Education, which we work closely with, will look at this data and use it to make schools safer, identify the schools that have the highest levels of violence, and then surge resources into those schools to reduce violence and increase the culture and the climate on campus and make schools safer places for all kids to learn, because that's ultimately what we want.
Yeah, and knowledge really is power. And as you said, bringing these resources to a point where they weren't in existence before and letting so many people learn about what's going on. You mentioned with regard to law enforcement, and we know that, tragically, there are too many. There shouldn't be any shootings, but we hear about more and more, and the role that law enforcement plays with that. And you look back in the rearview mirror and say, what did we see that we didn't look at more closely? So you now work closely with law enforcement agencies across the country, including the National Sheriff's Association as a member of their School Safety and Security Committee and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. So what are your recommendations for how district leaders and law enforcement officials can work best together to respond to emergencies as well as prevent violence?
Well, it needs to happen on the front end. You can't start this process in the middle of a tragedy or after a tragedy. Now we have MOUs between our school districts and law enforcement so that law enforcement has access to the cameras in an emergency. You have to have a reunification plan in Florida now, and that needs to be coordinated with law enforcement. And also, what we saw at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is that they weren't doing active shooter drills. And so we have instituted mandatory active shooter drills on all of our campuses in Florida. And I neglected to mention one of the most important things that we implemented after Florida, and that is that we have an armed school safety officer on every campus throughout the entire state. So all of our 4,000 schools, our public and charter schools, have a minimum of at least one armed school safety officer on all of our campuses, because we know that in these terrible events, when they happen, the most important thing is that we need to stop the killing, and so that we can stop the dying. But after Parkland, I had hoped this would never happen again, and then we had Uvalde. So thank God, I think we're starting to see, after those horrible tragedies have brought to light, the abject failure of law enforcement's response to those tragedies. Then, we saw what happened in Nashville. And as soon as those officers got on scene, they went right to the shooter and neutralized him and took him out. And that's what needs to happen. When we looked at Parkland, a lot of it I attribute to a lack of training. When we interviewed some of the Broward Sheriff's Office deputies about how long ago they had active shooter training, some of them couldn't remember. They said they could have been 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Well, in reality, it was every 3 years they were conducting, force on force active shooter drills. And that's just not sufficient to build the muscle memory, because when these horrible incidents happen, mass shootings around the country, individuals, whether it's law enforcement or school professionals, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your lowest level of training. And so when we analyze the response of the other responding law enforcement agency, the Coral Springs Police Department, they went right in. And I attribute a lot of that to their training, because they receive active shooter training every year. So I hope that we will see that happen around the country. And also, as the other thing that Florida just did is that we have mandated that every law enforcement agency have an active assailant response policy. You might think, oh, well, of course they have. And it's not the case. Many law enforcement agencies don't have active assailant response policies like we saw in Uvalde. So in Florida, we are mandating it that you have to have the policies and procedures. You can't expect law enforcement to perform heroically or do the right thing if you don't even have policies and procedures guiding them on what they should do and enacting the proper training. So, we've done that as well, and a lot of other things. We've been working at this for 5 years.
I can't imagine what you've been through. And you talked about how you had hoped that Parkland would be the last, but tragically, we have had more school shootings. And this clearly is not a localized issue. That is a national issue. And you were instrumental in working with the White House to create the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse. What types of resources are available through this effort? And what's next for the initiative?
Yeah. So after the shooting, I traveled this country, and I wanted to see what other school districts were doing so that I could bring it back to Broward County to make children safe here and my kids that were in school. And what I found was that there were some districts, pockets of this country that were doing great things, but nobody else knew about it. And so I came up with this idea to create a federal school safety clearinghouse. And at the time, President Trump had tasked Betsy DeVos with writing this report on Parkland and school safety called the Federal Commission on School Safety Report. And the president liked this idea to create this federal clearinghouse. And that's what he did. And he created it inside the Department of Homeland Security. And it's now housed on schoolsafety.gov. And it's really a model for what the federal government can do when they work together. You've got all the federal agencies that work on school safety. So you've got the Department of Justice, Department of Education, Department of Homeland Security, and HHS all working together to make schools safer. And all the information that is curated on schoolsafety.gov, it goes through an approval process of all those agencies, and then it's housed on schoolsafety.gov. That's the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse. It's a one-stop shop for all school safety best practices, resources, and grant dollars. And then we worked with President Biden to turn the bill in Alex's name, the Luke and Alex School Safety Act, turn that into law. And he just included that in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That was that gun safety legislation that he passed last year, the first time in 27 years. So I encourage all of everybody that's watching this to go to schoolsafety.gov, or even listening on schoolsafety.gov. There's two main features that I think are tremendous. Number one, they have a readiness tool. So basically, you can answer a series of 10 foundational school safety questions. And then questions like, number one, do you have an individual that is, assigned in charge of school safety for your school or your district? And then you answer that question depending on the level of where that person is. Is that person just assigned to school safety? Does he or she wear a lot of other hats? And then based on the answers to that and the other 9 questions, like, do you conduct developmentally appropriate drills, emergency drills on campus? Do you have an active assailant response policy? Do you have an emergency notification or a duress system? You basically answer these 10 questions, and then after you're done, it produces a tailored PDF based on the answers to your questions that tells your school what they should be doing first, what their priorities are, what they should be doing second, and most importantly, where your gaps are in your readiness. And then based on your gaps, it directs you to resources to fill those gaps and grant dollars. And so the other tool that they have on schoolsafety.gov brings all the grant dollars from all these federal agencies that work on school safety into one place. So you can go to the schoolsafety.gov grant finder tool to search through the entire federal government's grants to help make your school safer. There's billions of dollars of grants on this site. And after you complete that readiness tool, it directs you to resources and it directs you to grants to fill those gaps.
Max Schachter, founder and executive director of Safe Schools for Alex. Max, I told you off camera before we started, my deepest sympathy for your loss. I can't imagine what you've been through, and it's amazing to see how you've really, helped to turn that around to hopefully prevent that tragedy from happening to other families. So one final plea as we wrap up here for families, communities, law enforcement, school officials to do what they can to help prevent this in the future?
Yeah, I encourage everyone to go to schoolsafety.gov. We have 10 best practices for school administrators on what they should be doing. We also have the 10 best practices for parents for what they should be doing to make their school safer. And just going back to talk about the dashboard for a second, as you mentioned, Michelle, we're in 5 states. So I encourage everyone to check out our school safety dashboard, look up your school, see what's happening in your school, become educated and become involved in the safety and security of your school. And if you're so inclined, please support us. Our goal is to expand the dashboard to every state and continue the work that we're doing around the country. So thank you for having me. And it was really nice to spend time with you today.
Thank you, Max. And where can they go? The website for Safe Schools for Alex?
SafeSchoolsForAlex.org is our charity. And don't forget to check out schoolsafety.gov as well, the Federal School Safety Clearinghouse website.
Thank you again, Max Schachter, who is the executive director of Safe Schools for Alex. Really, really appreciate your time and job well done. And I wish you all the best in continuing to help make more schools safer and hopefully more states. So thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you, Michelle.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in to School Safety Today. It is a podcast brought to you by Raptor Technologies. And if you would like more information on Raptor Technologies, you can go to raptortech.com. Please subscribe to the podcast to hear more great episodes and more important information that we need to hear. Once again, thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney, and we'll hope to see you soon.